So who are you?
I am Josh Steinitz. I'm the CEO and founder of NileGuide.com. We're a travel planning website based in San Francisco.
Yeah, and Rocky and I go around the world and travel so much. I mean, in the last month, I've been to 3 separate cities, and so this topic is very interesting, but it's very competitive. I mean, I know of all sorts of different sites that are trying to get me as a traveler to come and plan out my trips there. And I also don't think anybody's nailed it. So that means there's an opportunity for somebody new to come along. What makes you different than all the other travel planning sites like, TripIt, Kayak, Expedia.com,
Yep.
How are you going to make a space for yourself?
You sound like a venture capitalist asking me the exact same question. And it's a good one. It's an obvious one because, travel is at the same time, the largest space online and potentially the most competitive, which, makes sense, right? So I think from our perspective, a lot of the activity has traditionally been around the transactional space, right? That was kind of the 1.0 wave of value creation. It was the online travel agencies,
Yep.
Orbitz, Expedia, Travelocity, and then
I like Kayak on my iPad. It's awesome.
Yeah, exactly. So
Put it
then
in the city and it tells you a whole bunch of
so Kayak has a world-class technology team and a fantastic product, and they've done a great job at essentially kind of arbitraging traffic, buying clicks at 50 cents and making a buck. And I would call that kind of the 1.5.0, innovation cycle, which means it was a kind of new and better cut on the booking experience. It's still limited to the transactional pathway, right? But if you think about kind of the life cycle of travel, and I'm sure we've all seen kind of slides or presentations about that, it's a lot more than just the booking piece, right? That's one area of value creation, but for these 3 trips you took, right, you spent a lot more time planning, organizing, even beyond that, being inspired to take the trip, and then post-trip, then you're on the trip doing things, finding things, and then post-trip sharing those experiences. That's really the full life cycle, and there's a lot of value creation yet to be had in those areas, not just around the transactional sphere.
Yeah, we were talking before the cameras turned on that I tell PlanCast I was going to the TechCrunch Disrupt conference, and it doesn't talk to TripIt, which knows my flight, and it doesn't talk to Kayak when I'm making the flight. It doesn't. None of these systems hook up to each other, and so the system itself doesn't get smarter and doesn't get more fun, right?
Yeah, well, fun. You nailed it, right? I mean, I think that's the other piece of it is that there's been a lot of kind of work and focus and energy on the logistics management, and there's some cool things happening there, like TripIt, like others. WorldMate is another one that I like and use. But we think there's a huge innovation opportunity on the content side, and really to scale out high quality, low cost, relevant content dramatically.
Now, content being what? Content photos I take and put on Flickr? Or?
Content meaning recommendations, personalized recommendations for what you should do on your trips.
Yeah.
Partially where you should go, but then beyond that, once you've narrowed that down to a place or a small subset of places, what should you do based on your interests for that trip? Not just who you are as a person, because your interests may change by trip, but when you're going to Los Angeles or Israel or wherever you have coming up, you might be looking for a romantic restaurant because you're taking your girlfriend out for a date, but you want it near your hotel, and then afterwards you have maybe before you had a business meeting, you want to kind of organize that in a logical way. Maybe you want to go hiking or find a beach or an art gallery or museum. You're not going to find it on that Expedia, right? Because you can't book it. It's not something that the traditional guidebook players have focused on because, again, it's not maybe structured data, or in the case of something like a TripAdvisor, it's not monetizable in the traditional kind of lead gen capacity. But that's why people come to places like Half Moon Bay, right? It's to surf, it's to golf, it's to hang out and enjoy it. I mean, that's part of why people get inspired to travel. And so we think there's an opportunity to connect the dots between that and the rest of the cycle.
But if you're here and you want sushi, it's easy to find that, right? You go to Google
it's
or you
validation or reassurance. That's the piece, and that's what TripAdvisor, that's their corollary in travel, right? It's, I'm thinking of staying at the Ritz-Carlton Half Moon Bay. I want to read about what someone who stayed there last night said about it. Was it clean? Was the staff friendly, et cetera? But if you're like, hey, I want to go to the Bay Area, what should I do? Where should I go? How should I organize my trip? That's not the place to start, right? It's just too much noise.
Yeah. And the other thing we were talking about is there's several different kinds of trips, right? When we go to Rackspace, it's almost like a templated trip because we're going to Rackspace. We know where we're staying. We know the hotels. We know everything.
Right.
And so there's not a lot of serendipity.
Right.
There's vacation travel, which is I'm planning a trip in a month for Los Angeles. I really don't know what I want to do.
Yeah.
I have a week and a half there, and
Yeah.
I know I want to sit on the beach a little bit. I know I want to go to Universal Studios. I don't know when. I'm still thinking through what's going to be the flow of it. And it's serendipity, and I want to be able to move it around. I don't want to be scheduled because it's vacation time, right?
Right. Well, exactly. And so, there are a subset of people, some might call them, anal retentive, who want to kind of schedule things down to the most granular detail. But most of us just want to collect a bunch of interesting ideas that are relevant for us and then have some basic organizational and sharing capacity with that. And so your trip to LA is a perfect example, right? You probably have a combination of kind of fun stuff that you might want to collect as ideas for possibilities if you have an afternoon free. You might want to actually, of course, you want to book your hotel and probably make a couple restaurant reservations, and then you might want to loop some business stuff mixed in, right? And so that's kind of where NileGuide's strong suit really comes into play, because we're pulling in content from lots and lots of different sources, and then we have a local expert on the ground in LA who's charged with making sure those recommendations are relevant for you. So the list of the best French romantic restaurants sorted by proximity is appropriate, or the list of the hippest hotels or the most kid-friendly attractions are delivered to you kind of real time. So really the way to think about our user experience and the way we think about it is kind of kayak but for content. You don't have to fill out a form, submit a profile, go through this long painful exercise for kind of uncertain benefit down the road. It's, hey, recommendations delivered dynamically as you set your preferences, because you're in control. You know your preferences for that trip at that moment.
Yeah. The third kind of travel is when you're going to a conference or an event or something like that.
Right.
You were talking about the World Cup, and that's different than vacation travel, right?
Right.
Going to TechCrunch Disrupt or going to the Apple Developer Conference, that's different than vacation travel. You're going there to be at a certain place, at a certain time, and have a certain goal in mind, because your boss is probably paying for you. So you need to write a report at the end saying, hey, here's the 50 people I met, and here's the meetings I had, and here's what I learned.
Of business cards.
Here's what I learned in class, all that fun stuff. But sometimes, when you go to New York or go to Paris for Le Web or go, to San Francisco for the WWDC, often you hook on a little bit of vacation travel,
Exactly.
two more days.
I mean, 50% of business travel includes a leisure component, right? That's not surprising. So we kind of think that's a false dichotomy, which is why, again, we don't say, hey, this is a business trip. Or you can say, I'm looking for a point of interest, a restaurant, a hotel, for business purposes, but then you might want to append on a hike, a golf outing, whatever, meeting up with an old college buddy for drinks afterwards. So you're right. So there's these different types of trips, not types of travelers. That's the really important distinction for NileGuide, and I think for anyone looking to kind of serve customers here. So you mentioned you've got the kind of commodity work trip. So in the case of NileGuide, that's a trip that's stored that you can just essentially clone that trip ad infinitum, right? Because you're taking that trip multiple times. Then you've got the custom leisure trip, which you can organize to your heart's content. You can start with a template, someone's idea for a kid-friendly trip to Cairo, or customized clone or a la carte to your heart's content. And then you've got this kind of hybrid. And so that's why we've tried to design this flexible system that essentially lets you customize on the fly. And at whatever level of kind of copying versus customization you want, if you're the time saver, I don't care, just tell me what I should do, versus I know what I want, versus I'm interested in being inspired. Serendipity is why I love to travel. I don't know what's around the next corner. Give me some recommendations. Oh, I wouldn't have thought that there was a really cool art gallery right around the corner from my hotel. Normally I'm not into art, but it's right there and they've got an exhibition on.
And some of it, I was talking with the guys at Next Stop, and they said vacation travelers don't like calendars because it feels like business, right? They don't want to put a Google Calendar and rigidly, we're going to go to Universal Studio this day, and then and
2 to 4 p.m. and then
that just makes you feel not good about your vacation,
makes
right?
you feel like it's a regular work day. Yeah.
Right. So where do you fit into this? Why am I going to use you instead of all of these separate little tools we've been talking about to sort of scatter our airline travel and our hotel and our rental car and then our experiential dinners?
Right.
Where are you going to carve this space out?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think to us the logistics piece is always going to be a business. It's not our business, right? Yeah. It's a place where there's plenty of innovation yet to be done, but it's not necessarily the place where people start. It's not where you get inspired. It's not where you research and kind of organize the trip. Yes, to get from A to B, you might have to rent a car or fly or whatever. That's fine. There's definitely work to be done there. But you're right. Fundamentally, we don't want to be a tools company. We want to be a content company.
Yeah.
You know, tools, as we all know, from the web's a crowded place. They don't create customers in and of themselves. You know, there's no if you build it, they will come. You know, it all starts with delivering quality content. Then we want to bring people down through kind of the funnel of travel with great planning and organizing tools and features and things like that, and actually even productize it so that that's another kind of complaint that hears. I want something to take with me, and it could be hard copy, so we dynamically generate a custom PDF that you can download and print, or have it sent to your mobile. So we have two, and now with the company we just acquired a few weeks ago, 3 iPhone apps in market where you can either get your custom guide delivered to you on the fly to your phone, or create one while you're in market, walking down the street, which is kind of location-based guidebooks.
Keep going, because I want to understand why somebody would use, where somebody would use NileGuide and how complete the service is. Do I ever have to go out to TripIt or go out to Kayak, or can I do it all from NileGuide?
Right. The way we think about it, again, starting with content, is that there's kind of several key pillars of information that people want, or categories that prospective travelers want. One is kind of professional guidebook content, the names that we know, Lonely Planet, Fromers, those guys, right? Folks want that objective kind of validation, that there's still room for that piece. So we pull that in. Then there's kind of all the breadth of other sources that folks use, like UGC from TripAdvisor, user ratings and reviews, TripAdvisor, iGo, YouGo, Travel Post, you name it. So we pull those folks in. So we work with probably 30, 40 different content partners. Awards is another category that kind of goes in the validation or reassurance piece. Yep. It won a Condé Nast Gold List award or something. So we're pulling in these third-party sources. So that's kind of one pillar of the stool, one leg of the stool. The second is kind of local expert content, kind of professional amateurs, folks who are charged with making sure that the content is fresh, recommendations are relevant, hot new bar or restaurant opens, maybe our recommendations on a algorithmic basis are simply 80% right, because it said kid friendly, babysitter, good for kids, etc. So we said that's kid friendly, but our local expert might know it's next to a strip club or something, right? So that's that piece. So that's one leg of the stool, and we've got a network of 60, 70 local experts around the world who are creating content 2, 3, 4, 5 times a week. And auditing the quality of our recommendations. So that's the second leg. The third leg is this company we just bought, Localite, which is essentially a global community of locals, tens and thousands of them, who are there ready and willing to answer your questions. So if you're going to LA, or for that matter, Antigua, Guatemala, or some random off the beaten path destination, they're there. You can tap into that knowledge base. Yeah. Your inquiry gets automatically routed to them. You get real-time responses, and you can rate the quality of those responses. And they essentially get points for giving you good content. So it's a marketing device for them, because maybe they're a tour guide or a B&B owner, or, but if they don't give you self-serving content but actually helpful recommendations, you can say that was helpful and they get points. That's kind of the third leg. And then there's just the users in general, right? So what we say is we want to pull in best-in-class existing content, layer on our own content from our local experts and our localites, and then start to have users publish their own content as well. So those are kind of the 4 legs for us. And that's why users would find NileGuide interesting, because no one else, most sites are kind of prejudiced to their own form or source of content, right? Yeah. And we're saying, actually, no, it's not an either or, it's an and and an and. It's all of the above, organized elegantly and seamlessly under one roof, and then connected into the trip planning functionality, the sharing, the collaboration. Now, you asked, would anyone have to leave? Yes, to book. That's not our game. That's not our bag. That there's lots of other companies fighting over that, and that's fine. Yeah. But we want to be the kind of owner of the itinerary, right? That's what's interesting for us at the end of the day. What you do when you get there, where you ate, where you stayed, where which museums you went to, which spas, all that kind of stuff. Yeah. And then we want to give you something valuable to walk away with. So instead of spending $30 on a non-customized, photos guidebook and ripping pages out and pulling your manila folder together, that manila folder analogy that I've heard, I think you've used. Why not walk away with something that's customized for free, that's really unique to you? So that's kind of our value proposition. It's like spend no money, get fully personalized, customized recommendations, planning tools, and a product to take with you on your trip.
Yeah. Now, when I've done vacation to places like Washington, D.C., if you want to take a private tour of the White House, I know that you have to get there after 6 p.m. Right. Does your guide know that? Does it, if you're laying it out and saying, I want to go to the White House, does it say, hey, come after 6 p.m. and plan out your trip so that you can get into the Oval Office. That's what's closed after until after 6 p.m.
There's two ways that we can help you with that. Number one, our local expert will give you'll see on NileGuide with a lot of points of interest, you'll see expert tips or insights, which is essentially their kind of on boots on the ground knowledge that, hey, this is something you should know about this place. Great deals at happy hour between 4 and 6, or in this case, private tours at this time or at this place, right?
Yeah.
Now we just launched events, which and we've tried to implement some of that logic as well. So to give you some sense for, hey, don't add beta breakers to your trip plan in December, right? Because it's a May event.
Right.
So some basic, now we don't want to constrain that too narrowly, right? Because you can kind of get down a rat hole of we still want to maintain flexibility and kind of serendipity.
I have all these services, that I use when I'm traveling on my mobile phone, and it's radically changing my travel experience, from augmented reality that shows me subway stops to TripIt that tells me my plane's going to be late and my connecting flight's going to be missed, and so I can reschedule flights right there on the flight. It's amazing, right?
Yeah.
So what am I going to have from you guys on my mobile phone?
Well, the way we think about mobile is it adds an important layer of relevancy to our ability to give you good recommendations, right? And enables you to engage with those recommendations during the trip, not just pre-trip. And so those two things are incredibly powerful. So actually with our new app called What's Next, you now essentially have an interactive, location-based, preference-based guidebook for the entire world, pulling in content from 30, 40 different sources, as well as our own local guides around the world, putting that all together in a nice UI, and enabling you literally to filter by not just kid-friendly, hip, romantic, offbeat, history, nature, all the things we do on the site, but also where you are at that moment. Right, so you're tapping into a huge amount of content for the whole world. I mean, we have hundreds of cities, right? And you can build a trip on the fly, literally walking down the streets of LA or London or Tokyo, and say, I'm looking for I've had a long day, I want a spa. Cool, I'll add that to my list, or I'll collect that idea. Sure, you can have all the guidebook content, that's all there, the history, the weather, great. But what about planning a trip on the fly and filtering what's relevant for you, not just the preference stuff, which we've always had and are good at, but where you are, and collecting a trip on that basis. So you can essentially now do all of that once you're on your trip. Some people are comfortable with that, some people aren't. Or you might just want to append to something you've already got, right? You've got all these things, but maybe you have an afternoon free. So that's how we think about it. It's like not just one source of content, lots of great sources, plus the preference filters depending on type of trip, not type of traveler, and then your current location, and giving that all there in the mobile device.
Yeah. How are you guys making money? Is it strictly off advertising, or are you going to do affiliate deals when you click over and go to Kayak and buy a flight or something like that? Or tell me a little bit about what you're thinking there.
Yeah, I mean, again, fundamentally, we're trying to focus on making sure that the content that we deliver is church and state, and that it's not driven by commercial considerations. We don't have sponsored listings or any of those kinds of things. But we're a business, right? We have to have a revenue strategy. So number one, yes, we're able to deliver kind of very targeted advertising around our user experience. Because we have this preference data, right, we can give you, if you're looking for a hip jazz bar in LA, you'll be looking at a very different ad than if you're looking for a kid-friendly restaurant in Orlando, right? One's a Disney ad, one's a Sky Vodka ad, or whatever the case may be. So that's certainly one piece of our model, and then the other is, as you noted, kind of transactional lead gen. So we've integrated, hotel booking, tour booking, restaurant booking, now event booking. We don't consummate the transaction ourselves, but we let our booking partners do that. So those are kind of twin pieces of our business model, and then mobile, we have an iPhone app. It's only $3, but it's it's part of our strategy.
Yeah. If I owned a business that catered to travelers, how do I get listed in the guide? How do I make sure I have a good listing? And
good question. So this is very topical for us. We just launched a feature called My Places, which enables any user of our website to add a point of interest. Publish it to our database, not just privately. You can privately, maybe it's your aunt and uncle's house and you don't want to make it public. But if it's a business that we don't have, whether it's yours or anyone else's that you think should be in there, you can now add that. And we'll go out and grab the objective data, the address, phone number, and all that stuff, so you don't have to fill it in yourself. But you can write up a description, upload a photo, publish it. You can also rate existing points of interest. You can publish your trip itinerary on NileGuide. So if you're going to LA and you've organized your trip on Nile, maybe you've started with someone else's ideas and then kind of a la carte your own, you can then make that public. That goes out to other users who can then take that and say, hey, this is Robert's trip to LA. That looks great. I want to start there rather than with a blank whiteboard. And then in addition, we've got some tools if you're already listed on NileGuide to enable you to essentially put a badge on your site anyone can click on that badge on your site, and it takes them the NileGuide automatically with your point of interest added to their trip list. Okay. So if you're Bob's Bed and Breakfast in Mendocino, you can add that badge to your site, and the user clicks that on your site. It takes them the NileGuide with Bob's Bed and Breakfast already added to their trip list.
Yeah. Do you work with corporate travel planners? Because I know at Rackspace we have somebody who helps with travel planning, but at other companies they really have entire departments that really try to work on corporate travel and try to make sure that you're going to somewhere reasonable. You're not going to spend $800 on dinner. You know.
Right. One thing we're trying not to focus on is logistics. Another thing that we haven't played in is the corporate market. Now we've been approached by some of the big corporate players to say, hey, could we give our customers, your Amex, your Sabre, your whatever, their own branded custom guides, right? Yeah. Sure, we can book their flights, but what about the rest of the stuff they do? Interesting for us, but for now we want to make sure we're a consumer brand first. Then we'll plug into kind of other platforms. We did launch a partnership with Fromers. Okay. So on fromers.com, the itineraries tab is now powered by NileGuide. So it's essentially our planning tools and functionality and software with their data. So we're starting to dip our toes into the water in terms of kind of the white label co-branding, affiliate partnerships. But fundamentally, we're still a destination website. Yeah.
And finally, the world is changing because of location-based services like Foursquare, GoWalla, MyTown. I mean, it goes on and on. There's like 15 different ones trying to get us to check in. Even Yelp, right? You go to a restaurant and they want you to check in and let people know, hey, I'm at that restaurant. Are you guys thinking about that at all, or making deals with Foursquare or anybody? How are you integrating that into your service?
I mean, the way we partner with these guys is to provide them with content. We're not trying to be a tools company, so we're not going to create, parallel the 50th check-in functionality out there, nor are we kind of a data licensing company, right? We would partner with them and say, okay, GoWalla, Foursquare, here's NileGuide local expert tips and recommendations. We see you're in Los Angeles. Here are some suggested trip itineraries. Here's some guides to various neighborhoods. Here's the difference between Hollywood and Santa Monica. Or here are some localites. If you want to ask you're in this bar, do you want to ask some locals a question for what's a cool thing to do nearby right now? That's how we'd work with them versus trying to kind of replicate that service.
Very cool. Any last thing you want to tell me?
We've been growing quite quickly this year, so we're on track to have millions of users by the end of the year, which is exciting. For us, that's kind of the first breakout piece of our story, right? I mean, there's lots of, as you said at the very beginning, there's lots of kind of midgets floating around the online travel space, and then there's the big boys, and what's going to kind of bridge that gap. And you've seen a couple companies that are now on the IPO track in that space, Home Away, Kayak. We actually share investors with those two companies, but what's the next big great story? And we plan on being that story.
Very cool. Where do I learn more?
NileGuide.com.
Very cool. Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks, Brian.